Settle in, and let us delve into a tale both ancient and unsettling, of a king's heart that refused to rest. The year was 1422. The air over Paris hung like damp wool, thick with smoke, incense, and quiet despair. In the crypt of the Cathedral of Saint-Denis, the body of King Charles VI lay stretched in eternal stillness. His hands were clasped over his chest, but no one dared to say they rested peacefully. He had reigned for 42 years, and for most of them he hadn't known who he was. He believed his bones were glass. He forgot his wife's face, then his own. He ordered executions and then cried at the funerals. He spoke to ghosts and laughed when his teeth fell out mid-sentence. And yet France endured, Burgundy rebelled, England advanced. Princes schemed, clerics whispered, and Paris bent without breaking. And now the king was dead. Except he wasn't, not entirely. There was a tradition older than Rome, older than Christianity, whispered through ages of monarchs and martyrs alike, the right of the detached heart. It was a burial ritual reserved for those whose soul was too fractured to fit in one grave. The Church rarely invoked it. It was dangerous, symbolic, and old, so old that even the Latin in its text came with footnotes written in dead dialects. But this was Charles VI, a mad king, a king with two queens, Isabeau of Bavaria and madness itself, a man whose bloodline carried whispers and visions. So the Church obeyed. A heart must be removed and buried apart, but not just buried, bound. That duty fell to Cardinal Jacques del Temon, a man known for his voice of iron and eyes of ash. He was not young, not old. He wore no ring, kept no journal, and gave no confessions. To the public he was a pillar of the French Church, unshakable in doctrine, incorruptible in finance, and merciless in heresy. But Jacques kept a secret. He was born during a lunar eclipse, beneath the same roof where a woman had died giving birth to a stillborn lamb with human eyes. The midwife never spoke again, and Jacques never cried. Not once. The room was silent except for the rasp of linen and the metallic scrape of the scalpel. 3 clerics stood beside Jacques as he performed the extraction. The body of King Charles VI lay beneath cloth and relic, half covered in incense smoke. The cardinal murmured a prayer in Latin. Then, with one clean cut, he opened the chest cavity.
The heart. It steamed. No one had lit a fire. No one said a word. Jacques reached forward, his gloved hands unshaking. But when his fingers touched the heart, it pulsed. Not in memory, not in decay. It pulsed like it had not stopped beating. A single drop of blood slid down the side and hit the marble floor. Where it landed, the stone hissed. That night, Jacques wrote a letter to Rome. He did not describe the heartbeat. He only said, "The king's heart is resistant. I will perform the rite as written, but I recommend it be sealed with salt and ash, and buried not beneath the ground, but beneath the weight of silence." He received no reply. Instead, a messenger arrived, mute, cloaked in white, bearing a small reliquary box lined with silver thorns. Inside, a folded parchment in ancient Latin. He who separates the blood from madness shall carry the echo in his sleep. Et silentium erit domus tua. Jacques said nothing, but from that night forward he stopped sleeping entirely. He was to take the heart to a monastery deep in the forests of Burgundy, one not found on any official map. Sanctum Severus, once a Roman site of sacrifice, later converted by monks who never took vows. As his carriage moved southward, the wind began to behave strangely. It did not blow, it coiled. It wound itself around the windows and spoke in rhythms, not quite whispers, not quite breathing. His driver fell ill on the second day. On the third, he vanished, leaving only his boots. Jacques continued alone. He kept the reliquary under his robes, close to his ribs. Each night he would place a single candle at the foot of the heart and speak aloud, "I am not your king. I am only your witness." But the heart, sealed in silver and salt, began to hum, not aloud, inside his bones. On the sixth night, just before reaching the forest's edge, Jacques saw her. She stood barefoot in the field of withered corn, wearing a green velvet cloak embroidered with eyes stitched shut. Her skin was pale, not white, but the shade of dust that remembers blood. She said nothing. She only held out her hand, palm open, revealing a dead moth, its wings dipped in ink. Jacques did not stop the carriage.
But when he arrived at the monastery, the same moth was waiting on the threshold. It had no head, but its wings were still moving. There was no welcome, no bell, no monks. Only a stone gate carved with 2 Latin words, Cor Sepultum. Inside, every corridor turned back on itself. Every door led to another door, and at the center, a room without corners. This was where Jacques placed the heart. He recited the full rite aloud, alone, without blinking. He poured the blessed ash. He circled the reliquary with salt and relics. He sealed the chamber with 7 keys. And then he wept for the first time. No one had ever seen the deep crypt beneath Sanctum Severus. Not the monks, not the abbot, not even Jacques, who had been entrusted with its guardianship. But now the earth itself seemed to invite him. The stairs below the reliquary cracked open like ribs. The air reeked of iron and rose petals, and the salt, the sacred salt, began to weep. Walls once coated in sanctified white now oozed with saline streaks tinged pink, as though bleeding. The monks tried to cleanse them, but the salt reappeared each dusk, in patterns, maps, maybe, or veins. Jacques followed the lines with his fingers. They pulsed. When he pressed both palms to the wall, the stones shifted, revealing a descending corridor carved in an ancient, non-Christian geometry, angled like broken time. He entered. Beneath the monastery was not a crypt. It was a cathedral, but inverted. Its altar stood on the ceiling, its pews hung from chains, its cross had no Christ, only a mirror. In the center, surrounded by concentric salt rings, stood a throne, made of iron, wrapped in red silk, and on it sat a shape in shadow. Jacques approached. The figure did not move, but behind it a heartbeat echoed, not from the throne, but from inside Jacques himself. He reached out to touch the silk. A whisper bled from the metal, "Sit. You have carried it long enough." Jacques staggered back. The throne began to rise, not lifted, grown, like bones stretching from marrow, and the figure on it slowly stood. He wore Jacques' robes, but his face was a skull covered in flesh that reformed with each breath. The eyes opened. They were Jacques' own. The doppelganger spoke, but not in sound, in memory. Suddenly Jacques remembered. He had not buried the heart in Sanctum Severus. He had carried it for years, sewn into his vestments. He had whispered to it. It had whispered back. The burial was ceremonial. The real reliquary was him. And the heart was no longer the king's. It had become a hybrid, king and cardinal fused in grief and guilt. The throne split open. Inside, a circle of figures, hooded, faceless, unmoving. Each held a censer. But instead of incense, they burned paper hearts. Each paper bore a name: Charles VI, Jacques d'Aumond, France, Christendom. The flame did not consume the paper. Instead, it carved wounds into Jacques' chest, real ones, bleeding through his robes. He collapsed. A throne whispered, "There is no absolution, only assumption." When Jacques awoke, he was robed in gold ash. The monks stood in a circle around him, chanting, but their faces had changed. They were all Jacques, hundreds of him, each smiling with different degrees of sorrow. He tried to scream, but his voice was a trumpet blast, echoing through stone like the herald of an unwanted Messiah. He looked down. The reliquary was gone. His chest was open. Inside, a burning throne.
The mirror had returned, not the ornate one in the reliquary, not the cracked shard in the ossuary, but a new mirror, full length, silver-framed, leaning silently against Jacques' chamber wall. He had not placed it there, but it watched him. Every time he blinked, it moved closer. One night, Jacques stood before it. The reflection did not match his motions. He raised his hand, his image delayed. He blinked, his image did not. Then the reflection smiled. Jacques did not. It began to speak, though the mouth never moved. You wore his guilt. You buried his voice. You prayed over madness. Now wear his crown. The mirror became a doorway. Jacques stepped through and entered a long hall. Portraits lined its walls, but each was unfinished, as if the artist had painted the eyes first, then vanished. One frame bore his name, but the canvas was empty. A plaque below read, "The man who vanished into another's shadow." As he walked, the faces on the other portraits turned, following him. Some whispered, others wept. None blinked. At the end of the hallway stood a pedestal. Upon it a single book bound in skin, but oddly soft, as though still warm. Jacques opened it. The pages were blank. Until he touched them, then they bled words, line by line. It was a confession, his own, but one he had never made. Memories poured out.
the king's final breath in the cardinal's arms, a promise to preserve his purity forever, a night when Jacques heard the heart beat after death, and a whisper from the reliquary, "I am still king, you are still mine." He dropped the book, the pages turned themselves. He found himself back in his chamber, except it was no longer a room.
It was a circle of witnesses, each version of himself at every age. The boy who first saw a corpse, the seminarian who lost his faith in a battlefield trench, the priest who kissed a man during Lent, then fasted for a year in shame, the cardinal who heard a king call him brother. Each version stared, none judged. One stepped forward and whispered, "You do not carry the heart any more. It carries you." Back in the reliquary room, now cracked and blackened, Jacques stood alone. He looked down at his chest. The skin peeled away without blood. Beneath, a burning throne of bone and ash, and seated upon it, no one, until he sat. The monasteric groaned, candles blew themselves out, and the reliquary box sealed shut without the heart, because the heart